Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the weekly webinar series, Embracing Change. We're going to shift gears today, and we have an esteemed professor and head of the family business program at IMD with us today. I would consider him a dear friend. I hope he does too. Peter Vogel, an incredible human being that has committed his life to really focusing on families and understanding, not only from a research perspective, but also from a consulting perspective, the dynamics and what is needed from a structured and an unstructured perspective. And today we're going to talk about the 5 touchstones of a healthy family enterprise. So Peter, thank you very much for the honor and privilege to be here together, to have this dialogue and to hear your experience, your wisdom, and what you see in, of course, an extremely esteemed, environment of education that families have the, privilege to be part of. So please, Peter, I leave it to you to first introduce yourself maybe and give us a little understanding, just briefly, of what are these 5 touchstones and why 5 and what are they? So welcome, Peter. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Feisal. First of all, for the invitation and for having me as part of your webinar series. Indeed, we are dear friends, and I always enjoy when you come over to our programs to speak as well and share your amazing story with our participants. So thanks a lot for inviting me to speak also as part of your series. So hello, everybody. Good morning and good afternoon and good evening. You're coming in from different parts of the world, and thanks a lot for taking the time to be part of this webinar today, and having hopefully also a conversation and interaction on what makes up a healthy family enterprise system and what can each one of us contribute to that. So just briefly, as Feisal said, I'm the director of the Family Business Center here at IMD in Switzerland, where we run open programs for families, but also for boards and top management teams in family businesses, family offices. So we've been doing that for over 30 years, and so that is the capacity I'm in. So briefly on the 5 touchstones, or the 5 stones of a healthy family enterprise system. So maybe a bit of context, and then I'll get into why 5 and what are the 5, etc. So fundamentally, when we talk about the family enterprise or family enterprise system, families, as they evolve, are becoming more and more complex, and they start companies. You have entrepreneurs that start businesses, and then over time they launch a range of other activities and businesses, family offices, foundations. So they really evolve into a full system, and as they evolve over generations as well, the family grows, the complexity grows, oftentimes mostly the wealth grows as well. So we hopefully so we really talk about a system, almost like an ecosystem. And of course, there are some families around the world that have hundreds, if not thousands, of family members within their ecosystem, and that's why we talk about a system. And when we say a healthy family enterprise system, that of course touches on a number of things, and within that system and the role that families, enterprising families, play in the world with their businesses, through philanthropy, through investment activities. We look at all of these elements and say, how can we, and this is more relevant than ever in times like this right now, where the world is heavily in shock and in disruption, and how can we effectively, as a family, as an ownership group, as a business, as a philanthropic group, as a father, mother, son, daughter, how can we collectively contribute to the ongoing healthiness of us individually, but also us as a family, our business in terms of business health, aka performance, but also, fundamentally the greater society, because the responsibility of enterprising families is of course, the majority of people in the world are employed by family businesses, which is one of the biggest responsibilities already, continuing employment in times of disruption and change and crisis, but also philanthropic giving and social impact, etc. So So you know, I already kind of briefly alluded to those five. I mean, it really, you know, when the way we built it up is fundamentally that the bottom stone is the individual level, you know, and we literally talk about the individual health and well-being. So each one within the family enterprise system needs to, in as much as possible and as much as we have it in our control, stay healthy. And this is very important, of course, for various reasons. Of course, it's a personal goal to stay healthy, and it's also important for the family. And in many cases, depending on how intertwined the individual is in the business, if it's a very, very heavily implicated CEO in a business with thousands of employees, and suddenly he or she gets sick or very sick, and suddenly cannot fulfill the duties anymore, or has an accident or whatever else, you know, if then the governance is not structured properly, and you know, then suddenly it's not only the individual and the family that is going to suffer, it might affect the business heavily. So that's a bit the idea of why we think it's important to also, you know, focus on that individual health element. I mean, historically, you know, many of you will maybe know the 3-circle model that John Davis and Taguiri had proposed 40 years ago, where it's family, business, and ownership, and the intersections of them, where you know, the family then, which is also the second stone, it's about healthy relationships, and are we as a family actually in good terms, and do we have a healthy family condition? But that does not necessarily look at the individual level. Now, that's why we said we need this individual level. And also the last stone, the societal impact, is also not included. That's why we added that. So, you know, so individual we covered. Family is really about healthy relationships. Who are we as a family? And how can we ensure that we as a family, if the family grows and we're all geographically dispersed, how can we stay united? How can we continue trusting each other? How can we continue taking good decisions together, and also be a family together? That's kind of that step. The third one is the ownership group. So part of, sometimes all of them, but mostly a part of the family will hold shares in the business if they're still an operating business. And that ownership group also needs to think about the healthiness of the ownership group, not in the physical sense, but again, more healthy decision-making, healthy relationships in the ownership group. Because I mean, of course, again, if the relationships among owners are not that good, then that again has huge implications on the business through the shareholder decision-making processes. The fourth level is effectively the business. So thinking about how can we actually ensure long-term success? How can we ensure that the business stays healthy across generations? And there we look at things like renewal of the business model, good management, good leadership, good governance on the board of directors, et cetera, et cetera. And then the last stone is really on societal and environmental impact of the family. So healthiness of our environment as an individual, as an enterprising family, and more than 80% of enterprising families are philanthropically active in one way or another. And that really looks at this last stone at the top, in the sense of saying, okay, I need to look at myself, my family, ownership group, business, but also fundamentally the world around us. So that is the idea behind this 5-stone model, which fundamentally forms the basis of a lot of our teaching activities. So we run, you know, the program that you, Feisal, also come in and speak, where you very much focus on the individual and the family stones with your very genuine and impressive personal story. You know, that is an integral part of the program, but also the other elements, of course. Yeah, so that's in a nutshell.
Okay, so when you look at these pieces, where do you see today most of the time, energy, and resources going into? And where do you see the gap? So you've got the 5 stones. I understand the sequence. We get the chronology. We understand that it's foundational at the individual level, then at the family level, then the ownership level, then the business and society. But where, I mean, we all know the stats, right? Where the issues are, it's communication and trust. So where are you seeing the time, energy, and resources being spent, and where would you like people to reconsider putting effort?
Yeah, I think, so if we think about family businesses or family enterprises or enterprising families, let's say, let's put the focus on the family. Because it's an individual that makes decisions where to put an energy and time into. I think oftentimes in family firms, in particular in family firms that are still family-led, most attention is on the business. How do we run the business? How do we make sure things are successful? Oftentimes the entire wealth is also, specifically in the SMEs, in the small, medium-sized companies, the entire family's wealth is also parked in the business. They don't pay out dividends, etc. They don't diversify. And so the entire attention is on the business. The unit of analysis is the business. That is why, you know, also historically, most of the programs in the world are around family business. But that's why we want to shift the unit of analysis from business more to the family, like a family in business or an enterprising family. Because we say, you know, there's so much attention on the business side, which is right, it's fine, it's good. But you need to find a balance, and one cannot exist without the other. And you know, Antoine Maillot from the Mullier family in France, he said it very nicely once. Where he said, you know, you cannot have one without the other. It's like a cart that is pulled by two horses. If one of them stops running, then essentially the cart drifts off. So you know, you need healthy, good relationships in the family. You need to have a strong family basis as a prerequisite for a successful business. But you need to have a strong performant business as well to ensure that over generations, the family stays united and healthy and happy as well, especially as the number of passive owners grows. So I think that is a bit what, you know, I think fundamentally what we're trying to do. And I mean, the family business space, advisory space, teaching space has always looked at these three circles very much: family, business, and ownership. And we now want to extend that a bit more and say, think about yourself as well and what that means for the other circles. And also think about how you and your role and your family's role and your business's role in society implicate that.
Okay, so do you feel that with the approach of bringing more emphasis on the family and that knowing that they're both equal and they work in tangent, right? It's the same side of the coin, right? We talk about being and doing, right? From being comes doing. Right? So I'm hearing there's a lot of doing, and we need to focus more on the being, which is the family side. Because right now, second to third gen, we know it's 30%, third to fourth gen is as low as 9%. So do you feel with these 5 touchstones, you've actually made a large enough pivot to be able to shift those stats, or do you feel that we still got a long way to go?
No, I mean, I think the particularity of the family business world is that it's kind of you know, about every 25 to 30 years, you have a bit of a Groundhog Day experience, you know, because it's a new generation coming in. And yes, of course, you might have been 5th, 6th generation. And of course, there's learning on the way. But each individual only goes through a succession once in his or her life. You only take over once and you only pass on once. This is not like something like, let's build a house. Oh, I don't like the way this was built. The next time I build a house, I do it better. You don't have that option. You do it once, and if you fail, it has massive implications. So you know, it's a challenge because the same issues, I feel like the same issues, maybe in a bit more of a sophisticated way across generations, but the same issues pop up again. The fundamental issues in families are, like you said, it's about communication. Yeah. And then communication is a bit of everything, you know, then communication about what? About succession, who's my successor, about wealth distribution, about who's more talented or not. Like that entails so many things, you know, kind of decision making in general. Who's entitled to what? Who is credible for what? How do we decide together? How do we communicate across branches and across different perspectives? How do we unify our point of view? And you know, it's always interesting. Of course, families get more sophisticated over time and over generations. And then, yes, but again, you as the one individual who has to take a decision, you don't have the experience from 2 generations ago. You maybe heard some anecdotal stories and this and that, and relationships have deteriorated because of something, but you are still in the decision-making process right now, and it's the first time you have to take that decision. So, and so oftentimes we see families putting in place very sophisticated governance documents, family governance and ownership governance, and they hire a lot of advisors and consultants to write down these very complicated constitutions for them. What probably the most interesting request I ever got in the last 3 years here at IMD was from a family from Southeast Asia that called up and said, so we're a successful family. We have put in place great governance over the last couple of years, and indeed they shared with me, I think collectively all the documents they have are north of 200 pages, wow. Very sophisticated. And they said, but we have one problem. We're 80 people. Nobody has ever read these documents. As a result, we don't take decisions based on these documents. Can you help us implement our governance? And I was like, what do you mean help you implement your governance? Didn't you decide on the governance too? So that's a little bit what I mean when I say, have I seen a systematic improvement? I feel like it's coming back repeatedly with every generation. It was a long answer to a simple question.
No, but this is the thing, right? It's simplicity, right? I mean, a governance document is the way we do things, the way, what is acceptable, what is not. And that 200-page document, as we know, including the Constitution, is just arduous, right? Just for you to read it, just to be able to advise already is a project and a half, right? So now let's take it, so basically you're saying that there's a repetition of the issues that were happening, but they're just being done in a more sophisticated manner, right? Because the fundamental issue of relationship, communication in all forms is still at the foundation, right? Yeah. So that means that what you're saying is that the work at the individual level maybe is not being done that is needed to be able to contribute, right? Or to show up, right? So we always say from our space is how do we show up without imposition, without expectation, and without judgment? Right, and we had a chat with, and we did a whole webinar with Philip Markovici on this topic. So knowing what I just shared, right, and we've talked a lot about this, what percentage of families do you feel are able to truly are working on that space to show up so that they're not attached to the outcome, they're not expecting, they're not imposing, they're not judging? What do you feel? Because that is the magical space.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have an exact figure, but from a gut feeling, I think it's for sure a minority of families. I think of course, it's always easier also in families, to focus on something that is objective. And the most obvious thing is the business or the money or the wealth.
Easy scorecard. It's an easy scorecard.
It's an easy thing to look at, and then it's easy to address that in some way or another. The family side and the individual side, these are of course some of the more difficult topics. And and that is creating a space of dialogue, creating a space of exchange. And I think that is probably one of the most important governance decisions a family needs to make, and with that I don't mean put it on a piece of paper and pretend to live by those values, but I mean like really embracing it in the everyday practice is how to put the fish on the table. If there's something smelly in the family, some issue, how do we address it? How can we and that might be related to me and my health, or it might be related to a next gen who is 50 years old with father or mother at 80 or 90 still running the show, being allowed the space to kind of in a very open, direct way to say, well, I mean, it's not like you're going to live forever. Can we kind of talk about this? And there are these taboo topics, or if there are fights between siblings or between in-laws, which is, and oftentimes the source of conflict in families is actually because the in-laws don't like each other. And that spills over to the bloodline family, and that then spills over to the business, etc. in my view, you can govern everything. Who's allowed to work in the business, etc. And you need to govern all of that. But in my view, the single biggest mistake of families is not to actively address and live by, if we have an issue, here's a forum, here's a space where we can address it individually and as a family, and it's accepted because we collectively agreed on it that way. And it's a topic that people don't feel comfortable talking about. If there's an issue between me and my brother, or me and my sister, or me and my parents, when is the right time, the right place, the right forum, the right way of putting the fish on the table? And I think in a way with that the other person is not offended by it, and that we can then engage in a constructive manner. So conflict resolution strategy, I think, is one of the most effective ways, but again, not on paper. I mean, like, really, we agree on it and we can look each other in the eyes. And if I say I have an issue with you, I tell you, and you will not be offended by it and shoot back. So I think if families genuinely manage to handle that, I think a lot of the problems on the family side are resolved immediately, and you can actually spare a lot of the governance documents.
Yeah. So again, you're going back and mirroring that it starts at the individual level, because how the individual shows up will determine the experience you're going to have in that safe space that you've created as a facilitator or coach or whatever you call yourself in that space, right? Yeah. So now, as you just talked about a 50-year-old with an 80, 90-year-old parent that is still controlling. Now, as people are aging, are you seeing that the passing the baton on is happening earlier, or are they really dragging it? What are you seeing more of?
You kind of see a bit of both, but I mean, on average, I think it's rather delayed. That people do hold on a bit longer. However, I think at least with the families we work, which on average are maybe some of the more advanced, larger families with larger businesses, just the nature of who IMD works with. So I mean, they typically have rather sophisticated businesses as well, oftentimes with professional outside management already and professional boards. Not always, but oftentimes. So there, the discussion is a very different one than what you see when you do, when I sometimes advise families. I do work also with some of the more like SMEs and that are maybe in the couple of 100 to 1,000 employee range, where maybe the governance is not highly professionalized yet. And there, of course, the dynamics are very different. And there, the discussions are also very different. And in such cases, things are dragged on. In other settings where the family has over generations already kind of pulled out a bit from an operational point of view, that's a whole different discussion. And there we see next gen being involved much earlier.
But is the issue that they're not investing in the next gen to prepare, or is it the issue that the older gen is holding on because they think they know better, or they don't? Their identity is tied to that founder owner situation, right? Because then they have to ask themselves once they let go. And we've worked with many founders who've sold, the question of who am I?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. I think now in these smaller companies, again, I think, if you put yourself into the shoes of a patriarch or matriarch, having run the company for 30 years, and this might be first gen or later gen, but heavily implicated individuals, have essentially worked 7 days a week, maybe 1 week of vacation a year, paid themselves a minimum salary, never paid themselves out dividends. Their entire life is devoted to this business. They have probably something like 20 direct reports. They're in charge of the global strategy, but at the same time, they're in charge of the color of the carpet in the entrance hall. And for these individuals, and we see that a lot, in particular these SMEs, these individuals genuinely have a hard time to pull themselves out. Not because they don't want to, they just don't know how. And the entire organization has been set up in a way that they've put themselves, knowingly or not, into the bottleneck position of the company. So everything has to go through them. Many call this phenomenon monkey management, where kind of employees are trained to pass everything by the patriarch or matriarch for approval, which leads to a situation where on a Friday at 6 p.m., you have an executive with a question going to the CEO saying, oh, I have an issue, but, can you take a look at it? And, the employee goes home and has a barbecue with the family, and the patriarch sits there for 4 hours, and that's his Friday evening. And we see a lot of that. And so I think oftentimes they really don't know how to get themselves out of the equation, technically speaking. And oftentimes it's then linked to replacing managers, that you need managers that are more entrepreneurial and more hands-on themselves, that have the guts to take decisions. Right now, we do programs with family businesses with a top executive team to prepare the leadership team for the succession event. So we say, in the next 5 years, sometime, there will be a succession event. By then, you will need to be ready to be empowered, responsible leaders on behalf of the family, because if not, probably you will not be part of this business anymore for very long. So you see that a lot, that if this is not properly handled, then many businesses fall into like a leadership vacuum, we call that.
So there's no specific, yeah, I see a question.
Yes.
Many first generation owners do not want to let go, thinking, what will I do if I give up?
Yes.
What do you suggest?
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. I mean, you see that a lot, kind of first gen, second gen is probably this peculiar transition, right? The entrepreneur transition to successor transition is probably one of the more difficult ones. I think fundamentally the big question is for anybody who is about to retire or step down, or I think the big question is not what am I retiring from, but what am I retiring to?
Sure.
So what's next? What's my next project? What's my next hobby? What's my next passion in life? And oftentimes the only answer they find, because they've devoted their entire life, their entire career, they sacrificed oftentimes the family for work, 7 days a week, their personal health, their personal hobbies, their friends. What is left? It's the business. So what's the only answer they can give themselves, honestly, to what am I retiring to? Yeah, maybe chairman of the board. I'll pop in from time to time, but I'll be hands off. And then they realize, oh, I'm sitting at home, and then spouses, suddenly they sit at home together. They don't know what to do. They don't have hobbies together anymore because father or mother, patriarch, matriarch, it doesn't matter in which direction, has been at work for 30 years every day. And suddenly they sit at home together, and what do? We go dance tango, we go play tennis, but we go travel the world, we start a philanthropic foundation, but what is my new identity? Yeah. And I think that is, again, one of the biggest challenges why succession fails, is that the senior generation does not embrace the idea of, I need to find a new purpose of being, a new ikigai, like the Japanese say.
Yeah. So have you read Bob Buford's book, Halftime?
No.
So it's interesting, right? I mean, my halftime was at 35, and basically what he says is that, you spent the first half of your life building, right? Building families, building business, building position, building respect, etc. And the second half is about giving. But the thing is, it's to look at the first half and see what were the core strengths and talents, basically the genius that you built, and to use those in the giving. And the giving doesn't have to be charity. It can be giving at another level, right? And it could be a business, right? It could actually be a business, but you're using the same core talents, right? It's adding value to society. So I think that's something that maybe, that a lot of the owner founders that you're mentioning to, need to have that support from people like yourself, to have that exercise of who am I, what is the genius I created, and how can I pivot, right, with that genius.
As an entrepreneur, I mean, to come back to the question of Pramod, I think it's an important one for every entrepreneur, whether it becomes a family business or not. Many entrepreneurs sell their companies, or they have to shut down or whatever. But I think as an entrepreneur or as a manager in general, I think, and I mean, I've started a company when I was a bit younger and was running it. And then for 3 months, my dad and we decided to go sailing together. And at the same time, I was the CEO of the startup, and we were like, "Ooh, will this work out?" CEO gone for 3 months and everything, and we kind of set it up in a way, and surprise, surprise, it worked out. So I think entrepreneurs, every entrepreneur should probably once go through the experience of letting go from the business for a certain period of time, which is more than a week, but like seriously, like 1, 2, 3 months, like just take yourself out of the equation and see what happens. Yeah. And you will be surprised to see actually things kind of just move on. I mean, maybe a bit different, but surprisingly they move on. And I think that's a very good self-reflection to realize we should not take ourselves too important in this equation. And I think once you've realized and internalized that, it's a lot easier to let go.
But even during COVID, right? So a lot of the CEOs and owners were traveling to their different, different companies in the different countries on a regular basis, right? They were on the plane up to 6 months of the year. Yes. And now many of them are doing even better. Of course, many are challenged as well. I'm not saying that, sure. But what they're realizing is, like you said, life goes on and things continue. And I don't really need to be necessarily physically there, right? Yeah. I don't really need to be. And one of the things we do when we're doing coaching with the families, and a lot of them, like you said, have multiple, divisions, right? So we ask them, we say, okay, as an example, 4 divisions, right? So we say, okay, if you were physically out for 3 months, what would be the impact on these four divisions? And funny enough, the first one to hurt is the original business they started.
Sure.
That's the one that's hurt. Then we say, okay, now it's 6 months. I'm sorry, but you're out of action for 6 months. And when I say 6 months means no reporting, no conversation, no nothing. And then they go through the analysis, and funny enough, a second one has an issue. Then we say 9 months, and they're getting pissed off, but I was out for 11 months, so they can't really say much to me, right? And then we go to 9, and then the third one has an issue, and then eventually 12 months, and we ask them, right, are you empowering or are you creating crutches, right? And it's funny that every time we do it, the founding business is the first one to crumble. Yeah. Right? Is that? Do you agree with that? Do you see that as well?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, in many family firms, the further away also from the headquarter you are, the more independent from the founding family you can be. I mean, we work with one family business with different regions. Some are managed by family, some are not. It's exactly the same thing. The headquarters is struggling in this situation. The one that is run by the non-family member is actually the one thriving in this situation. Yeah. And because they run more autonomously, more entrepreneurially, and that is quite common. Yeah.
And we'll answer the next question. Yeah. So I will go to that question. The thing is that what it's referring to again is moving from owner-manager style business where we're all contributing to shareholder. Now, in that transition, are you seeing any cultural difference, or do you think it's across the board of moving from owner to shareholder, right? And manager, owner-manager to shareholder? What are you seeing, if you can share with us?
Well, I think fundamentally, there are so many different constellations, right? You have to look at the evolution of generations, but then even sometimes, in the 5th, 6th generation, you will have somebody who very much embraces the owner-manager kind of mentality. So, there is kind of, it so much depends on the character, on the individual of the dominant leader of the family. Okay. So even multiple generations down the road, you can have a very entrepreneurially minded and spirited individual who is like a first gen, really, and you could effectively start counting again, even though ownership is maybe dispersed. But so I think there are like multiple dimensions that overlap here. One is the ownership dimension that disperses unless you systematically prune the tree across generations. But at the same time is also, what is our role inside the family business? Are we active? Are we passive? How are we active as managers, as board members, or really as entrepreneurs, as change agents? I think there's so many dimensions that play into this where it's very difficult to generalize and say, if you go from that stage to that, of course, there are certain patterns that if you go from a kind of a owner, manager, founder stage into there are multiple shareholders, maybe siblings or cousins, then of course decision-making changes. You need to be more consensus-oriented. It can no longer necessarily be this one individual. Or if it is that one individual, the others will be upset. But that is oftentimes the case. You will always have, in a sibling constellation or cousin constellation, you will typically have one dominant figurehead who is the head of the family, representing the family on the board or as a CEO or whatever. And then he or she decides in that sense on behalf of the family, but not necessarily always after consulting with the family. Yeah. And we've seen so many cases where that, after whatever period of time or for whatever reason, has backfired heavily on the family side. And yeah.
So I think that's what they're referring to. Is one challenge I often see is with the next generation is that one of the sibling is much smarter. Okay, that's a question mark, but then the other, he or she feels all the hard work is put by her or him, so they should get more. This creates a dispute as the parents want equal distribution. How do you resolve it, right? I mean, that's easy, but not easy. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's one of the big questions in families, right? I mean, how to split the pie, remuneration of active and passive owners. Is it fair that active owners get something in addition to dividends while the passive owners don't? Why shouldn't they? If they work in the business, they get a salary. If they don't, they don't. My view. But yes, that is one of those disputes. Or, is it fair that, 3 children, one of them works in the business, the others have no interest in the business whatsoever. Is it fair that they both get 1/3 of the business? Question mark. Those are some of the big debates in the business or in the family, from an inheritance point of view or from a gifting point of view. Or do we need to create some sort of a buyback mechanism that ownership over time is transferred to the active one? Is it fair that one person, and I mean, we know many cases, and we've been working on ownership programs with families where you see that, one sibling is kind of the servant leader for the family for decades, and the others are just essentially living off the dividends. I'm a bit oversimplifying, but there was this exact one case like that. One individual worked his entire life as CEO and then told the family, I'm going to retire in the next 3 to 5 years. 4 siblings have never worked in the business, have never worked at all, as a matter of fact.
Oh, wow.
Only lived off the dividends. It's a larger conglomerate in South America. And as a matter of fact, he was the only one who did not have children. And so he said, I have like so and so many years left in my life. So you handle it, passed on shares to the siblings and retained the usufruct and said, figure it out. But, there you could really see that the passive branches of the family, because they were not involved, none of them had any knowledge of the business. Not even to the extent that they didn't even know where the headquarter was or what the magnitude of revenues was that they lived off for 20, 30 years. So you have all of that. And yes, I mean, and then the question comes up, to him, why did you do this? Like you could have also just lived off the dividends. You could have hired an external CEO and go sailing and enjoy life. And, but he was kind of a servant leader to the whole family for his entire career. So, but I mean, to the question, I think it's also there, it so much depends on the character. I think in that particular case, he did not feel like, I mean, yes, he had a salary through the company on top of the dividends, which in that particular case, the salary the dividends were the main point. So the salary was just an addition. I think it also depends on the balance. In a company that doesn't pay dividends, questions like this might come up, like why does he or she get a salary and I don't get anything from the business if the policy is we don't pay out dividends? But in a company, if it's a big family business and you have a dividend policy, it might even be a listed family business. Take the Porsche PH family, Volkswagen, Porsche. The family is not necessarily involved in the business. Some board representatives, but I mean, listed company, family biggest shareholder. So yes, they get a lot of dividend payments, and the majority just live off the dividend, or many just live off the dividends. And then that's a whole different story because everybody gets more than enough. And then if one of them works for the company and makes a salary as a manager, in relationship that doesn't really tip it. So I think it really depends on the constellation.
So on the 5 stones, I mean, we've spoken a lot on the individual and the family side, and obviously from our perspective, the individual, when we look at health and well-being, we're looking physical, mental, emotional, relational. And I think we've spoken a lot on the physical and the relational. Obviously there's the mental and emotional. But now on the business side, structure-wise, are you seeing still a lot of issues on structure, on the ownership structure? Do you still see people having challenges with that? And then it all blows up when somebody passes away? Or are you seeing more because of divorce? Because there's a lot of dynamic changes happening, right?
Oh yeah.
As time progresses. So what are you seeing? What do you see more of? Or I know you can't generalize, but at least give us some warnings, right?
You see a bit of everything, really. And that comes back to the point of, in every generation, you kind of repeat the story. And constellations change. Suddenly there's a divorce, or people marry other partners and suddenly they don't get along anymore. That creates dynamics. Suddenly somebody passes away or gets sick. That creates dynamics. Next generation not interested. That creates dynamics. External environment, market dynamics kicking in, big trends, technological, etc. That kicks in. So I think, I mean, what is interesting from a governance point of view, a business governance point of view, or an ownership governance point of view, I'm oftentimes surprised when working with families and owners and boards of family businesses, larger family businesses, is how they manage to get to where they are today without having the structure in place. And these are oftentimes billion-dollar companies that don't have any structure at all. They don't have a family governance. They don't have an ownership governance. The board is composed of only siblings from the family, no external board members. You have siblings reporting to each other in the company, and at the same time on the board, at the same time ownership. And there's no rule about who's going to take over under which conditions. There's no rules about anything. And they still manage to create these incredibly successful companies, which, okay, there might be industry effects. Certain industries are just flourishing, and then despite the fact of having a lack of governance, they flourish. That's one way of looking at it, but I think there's something else to it as well. And so, but I'm always amazed by that.
But that's the magic of the entrepreneur,
so
right?
My view is also a bit, but my view is also a bit, because I think this whole, that's why I gave this story of the Southeast Asian family with the governance. I think in the market, and again, I also work with families as an advisor and so on, but, there's so much supply of family advisory that, everybody who took like a 2-hour online class is now calling him or herself an advisor, trying to sell, I can help you set up a family constitution. And families oftentimes don't know better. They just believe the title, they believe the buzzwords, and then oftentimes they're lured into setting up this complex stuff. And while I'm convinced that in many constellations it makes sense to set up these things, especially for larger, more complex families, to avoid issues, I also see cases, especially if it's smaller, less complex family structures, where actually going through the hassle of setting up a full family constitution, etc., is a waste of time and money. Where I actually advise the family against doing that. Where I say, okay, still as a family, we need to agree on certain things, but look, I mean, there will be one of your kids will take over and the others will be bought out. I mean, don't overcomplicate things. So I also feel like, and that maybe is part of the answer to why you then sometimes end up with these billion-dollar companies that are really successful despite the fact that they don't have any proper governance. Because maybe, and that's a bit self-criticism to the education and advisory space, maybe you don't need to govern everything in the perfect way.
Maybe it stifles, right? So there's a lot of instances where it stifles you. It stifles the growth. It stifles the decision-making. It's actually an impediment to be in continuous flow that is needed, right? The agility and the adaptability also gets gets imposed upon, right? From the paperwork, quote unquote, that you just mentioned. Right?
So we're working. We were in April. We were hired to do an advisory project with a family business from East Asia to do a corporate governance review and help them kind of reposition their corporate governance and decision making. And they sent us a document that was 150 pages long with decision making. Like who takes what decision? Like every decision is one line. On HR, on marketing, on strategy, on finance, on leadership, on whatever the subject matter, legal, compliance, and line by line, and thinking about the different lines of report in the company from president down to line manager. Every decision was in a meticulous way. There was a cross. Who is in charge of it? And who created this document? You can guess once, the patriarch. And who's the only person knowing this document? The patriarch. So the entire organization actually has been stifled by this. They have been slowed down by this over-engineered governance document. So again, we then sometimes say, simplify, reasoning, entrepreneurialism, sometimes gut feeling decisions. You do not need to regulate every single decision. So it's a fine balance.
So in COVID, what are the 3 positive things you've seen in terms of the families that you advise and you're close to? And what are the 3, so positive and the other end that you've seen opportunity-wise? So tell me what.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and again, very difficult to generalize, but what is for sure on the philanthropic side, I mean, we do a lot of research on family philanthropy. Over the last months, we've been interviewing over 80 families around the world on their philanthropic giving, and going to bring out a book in November this year on family philanthropy. And what we saw in the crisis was a true, genuine desire to give and to help do something, which, I mean, families anyway, over 80% of families give in some way or another, but here it was very, very pronounced. So that is clearly one of the things. I mean, one of the other things that we see is that, or also what we recommend families to do, or what we recommended families to do in this time period, is that as a family to kind of get closer together and of course watch out for the vulnerable ones in the family, but also as a family and ownership group, send a sign of commitment to the business. Signal to the business and the employees that you are in it for the long term. So if the business is suffering, you're not necessarily going to sell it to the next private equity. You as a family are committed to roll up your sleeves, get to work, but in turn, we expect it from everybody else as well. Yeah. We commit to you, dear employees, but in turn, we expect loyalty, and yes, maybe we expect a bit more work and possibly for a few months a bit less salary if things are tough. But in turn, we commit to the long term. So we see a lot of that happening, which I think will the companies that will do that or have done that, I think they will, if they survive, which many of them will, they will come out of this stronger, because they will be much closer as an employee group, but also with the ownership group. I think the companies that are struggling most now, I mean, I don't think necessarily that COVID is the reason why certain companies are struggling. I think COVID is the trigger to surface more fundamental issues on the governance, on never having digitally transformed the organization, never having thought about what does the digital e-commerce space do to us. And now they're all kind of trying to race after this and suddenly become a digitally savvy company. And I think essentially now it's just surfacing all the failures of the past, but it's not the virus per se. Consumption is still relatively stable. And you see the divide even more now with the NASDAQ companies, the tech companies going like this, and the others kind of more stable. So So those are some of the.
So there was not only retention, more retention in the family business you saw, but also more commitment, right? And on the other hand, and then those who are, but on the other hand, did you see also the ability to change? Like I mean, the families we're serving, we saw families who would have taken, they told me 7 years to make changes. They did it in 7 weeks.
Yeah.
Right. So it was a waiting to happen, and they just did it faster than anybody could imagine.
Yes, so I think that is one of the big strengths of family firms is because you are a business owning family and you can essentially decide on your own. You can take decisions much more effectively under the assumption it's the right decision, but you can more effectively decide. This acceleration, yes, we see that everywhere, also here at IMD. I mean, our president always says COVID has forced us to digitally transform in 3 months what we had planned to do in 3 years. So I think that's a bit the same for every type of organization. One interesting thing that I saw was in the context of succession. Now, in 2 companies actually, where you know the senior generation was kind of playing around with the 2025 succession planning. So stepping out from the operational lead by 2025, and you know, and I came in, or we came in to kind of support that succession process on a 3 to 5 year timescale. And in both cases, effectively, within months, the next generation has taken charge.
Wow.
Where effectively in one of the cases, you know, the idea was, okay, we have a bunch of operating companies. Father is running the main operating company. Son is running another one. The idea was that to set up a family hold or business holding and then a family holding, that the father retreats to the management holding as a CEO there. The son takes over the main operating business. Then after 5 years, father migrates into the family holding and son becomes the group CEO. That was the plan, the master plan. What happened now is that actually father decided to keep running the main operating business through the crisis. So to say, I'm not going to find an external CEO and hand over a really troublesome business. But the son became group CEO with immediate effect. So now the son is the boss of the father.
Okay, and how's that going?
Yeah, it's interesting. It works out quite well, actually. But that was really, you know, quite interesting because we were constructing all these scenarios and how could this work, and you know, I mean, we did play around with a number of scenarios, and at some point they then decided, yep, this is what we're going to do. So the son is now charged to drive the group into the future.
But I assume it came from them, not from you, because that would have been a bit of a...
Yeah, no, I mean, we did play around with different scenarios collectively, but the decision ultimately, I mean, they came up with it, yeah.
Okay.
But that was an interesting one. So yes, I agree, a lot of acceleration in decision making.
So in terms of, you know, we hear a lot of families waiting on the sidelines, waiting to buy businesses, sitting on a lot of cash. What are you advising families from that perspective? Let's go beyond now the business. We went to the ownership, we went to the business, the philanthropy. Overall, like what are you seeing people coming to you for help now? Which area is it during this challenging time?
Yeah, I think it's a number of things. I think many are using this as an opportunity to revisit their governance and say, okay, we need to professionalize on whatever form or shape. I think that is clearly one topic that is on top of everybody's agenda. Now we need to do it. It didn't work out. We didn't have in some cases, it was amazing how long it took them to have like a COVID task force in place. While other companies have been doing it for months, then sometime in May, they suddenly had a task force to kind of give guidance to the business what they should be doing, kind of 3 months into it from a European perspective. And, so they then started realizing, like, oops, yeah, maybe that wasn't as good as it could have been. So let's take this as a learning opportunity and become better next time. But so there's a lot of this governance stuff. And on the investment side, I think that's an interesting point because I think we have a lot of family office related conversations. I mean, we of course work with a lot of family offices as well. And many families are per se anyway interested in setting up a family office, but also professionalizing a family office. And indeed, I mean, a lot of families are sitting on a lot of cash. That is, and where do you invest? Okay, I mean, the ones that were smart maybe put it back in mid-March and sold it again around this time. And yeah, you might make good money in the stock market. But again, I mean, real estate was kind of the thing for the last 10, 15 years. Low interest rates, some started playing around with startup investments. Many have burned their fingers doing that. So what do you invest in? And that is a big challenge. And I think indeed now is an interesting time for private equity type activities. And my gut feeling is, I mean, I haven't seen that many real cases yet, but my gut feeling is that individuals and families will probably start acquiring companies, operating companies, not startups, but profitable or operating companies. So become more of a private equity type player, which again, I mean, it's like startup investment. I mean, to be a real private equity investor, you need to have that expertise as well in-house. So like with the startup investment, many people have burned their fingers, and I assume that in this time now also many will be burning their fingers with private equity deals.
So you're not seeing that because there's not that many opportunities out there, that people are now investing a lot of time and energy to create entrepreneurship within the family, to create a fund and really support that process? You're not seeing that?
In part, I mean, some families have been, I mean, in general, entrepreneurship has been on top of the agenda for so many families over the last years, largely driven by the next gen or because of disruption from the outside. So they have been collectively interested in entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship. I haven't particularly seen a spike in that interest now over the last couple of months, but I think the level was already at a very high level in general. I mean, families are just genuinely interested in, the next gen. They want to start up their own companies, and how can we combine that with our business, etc. But for sure, I project that we will see more private equity type investments from families, from family offices.
All right, we have a couple more minutes to go. What would you like to share that we didn't touch on? Doesn't matter the topic, doesn't matter the space, to add value to, there's a lot of family members. I mean, pretty much all of them are on the call, second gen, third gen, fourth gen, and that have looking at opportunities as well as challenges, right? So what would you like to share that as parting words?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think again, it depends so much on, are you a family in business with an operating company, or are you an investing family?
Many of them are, yeah.
So I think it really depends. And if you are a family in business, many of the businesses are struggling, and it's tough times. And I think, with the Swiss Economic Forum, we were running a series specifically on SMEs in Switzerland.
Yeah.
And, I think it is really, really tough times. And it is probably one of those times where, if you have capital reserves and you commit to the continuity of the business, I think these are big decisions for families. And, is this the business we want to continue doing? And if you do that kind of investment now, then it's a long-term investment. So, I mean, I think the beauty of family business is this long-term vision and approach. And many families have set up their financial structures also in the long term to be more financially prudent and to be more crisis resilient and adaptable. So I mean, my advice to the next generation in the family, in the businesses, would be to push the boundaries and to push an more entrepreneurial agenda and renewal and adaptation, and let's get future ready. Let's take this shock as an opportunity to get future ready. Look around, maybe there are some acquisition targets. Why not? Crisis is an opportunity. look around and take this opportunity to renew the governance. And for the senior generation, I think it's an opportunity to accelerate succession, to onboard the next gen, to listen to them, because they are digitally savvy. They are part of this new world. They have been, and let's get the company ready. The world of work, home office. Many of the family firms we work with have a very conservative view to work from home. In their mind, in the patriarch's view or matriarch's view, work from home means no work. Hang out on the couch. But I think the last months have proven that this is not exactly true.
Actually, it's the opposite. Most people have been much more productive than ever.
Correct.
Because they don't have the distractions. They don't have the have-tos. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah. So there, my advice would be to really embrace this as an opportunity to advance the company into the 21st century finally. Because I think many companies have not, and so that would be kind of my closing advice.
All right, thank you very much, Peter. Look forward to being with you on the 30th of September, COVID allowing, which is quite hilarious to say, but it's a reality, unfortunately. But I'm very confident. So thank you again thank you for the honor and privilege to have this dialogue. Really, thank you everyone for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be with us today. And we're going to be here next week with Henry Chong to talk about something that you just spoke to, which is how digitalization is not only impacting our lives, but actually improving our lives and the quality of life, right? So really, and we'll look at the well-being side, but we're going to talk a lot more in general, looking at this is a second gen family business individual, from a family that started as trust structure, now has gone into an investment side, and really looking at the financial digitalization, and so a clear example of the advice that you just gave of, let's look at it from a different lens, a new lens. Doesn't make it better, doesn't make it worse, it's just different.
Yeah.
So once again, thank you, Peter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, and let's stay in touch. Reach out on LinkedIn, and then if you have questions, send them to Feisal or to me or whatever, and we can follow up.
Yes, we will. So we'll send the name of the book. It's Halftime by Bob Puford. That was a question that was asked. Yeah. And if there's any other things, Peter, you'd like to share, we can send it with the recording tomorrow. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Peter. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.